Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shape, episode 3. I'm here obviously with Derek, and today we're going to be speaking about motion. And we're going to talk about how that applies to our day to day and how we get our opinions on it as well. Um, so, yeah, one of the kind of things that I wanted to talk to you about today, Derek, was Stammy's tweet, which is here. Um, you know, could not agree more. So basically, what he's referring to is Rownell's his course, where you know he's highlighted here. I just simply don't believe in a motion system as a concept. And then Stammy's replied saying, "Could not agree more. Once worked on a design team where a motion designer came in and was trying to pitch that we only use 3 types of animations for everything to simplify." Um, so he goes on to talk about like the easings that they were kind of referring to, and obviously putting that into some sort of like design system. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to start off the conversation, I guess, with how you feel about that. Do you believe in like a sort of rigid system for animation or anything in general? Like I think this can apply to the kind of design in general. Like shadows, containers, things like that, like effects on those sort of things. So yeah, curious to know some of your thoughts on that.
Very aligned with Sammy and Rano here. I think that there's definitely a use case for each in this. More on the product logged in side of things, I could see a bit more patterns being developed between similar components. Um, but yeah, with Rano, that I take everything here, differently, and it's not very documented. Now you go to the marketing side of things, and it's a free for all. I mean, we're talking about illustrations,
Yeah,
and sort of telling that story through really high five, lots of movement, very intricate animations. Um, but those are very, very one off. It's just hard to repeat all that. Now
yeah,
I think that there's consistencies within your brand of how you want something to feel, and you want that sort of consistency between animations or between
yeah,
illustrations that are animated. And that might be some easing curves or timings or stiffness or dampening, or I think bounce. It would be very odd to go from one illustration scrolling down the page to another scroll, and like the first one had like a big bounce to it on something that was happening, and then the next one had like a dampening and didn't do a lot of bouncing. So I think that they're systematizing that makes a lot of sense, just again from like a brand
yeah.
consistency of how you want those transitions and animations to feel.
Hmm.
But the speed of them might be completely different. It usually is completely different. It's based on the storytelling that you're doing. What is moving and why is it moving and what are you trying to convey? On the product side of things, in the logged in state, much more consistency there, of course, dialed back. Um,
For sure.
I think in the marketing side of thing, it's very flashy and
Yeah,
impressive, but flashy and impressive on the product, the UI side of things is very dangerous, because now you're getting to the territory of you trying to be too much as opposed to
yeah,
using the animations for intent and
yeah,
for value rather than
yeah.
flexing. So yeah, there's two
Definitely,
different sort of strategies there for me.
I agree. I think 100%. I think you can. I think you can definitely bucket specific animations for specific use cases. So like you said, I think it's a lot more common um, inside the actual product, like product design aspect of things, where you don't really want to. You don't really want to be using like all these sort of different animations like everywhere and anywhere, and I think that just adds to like almost the clutter of like the kind of UI and the experience overall. But yeah, totally agree. I think speaking from my experience in designing like websites, I feel like you have a lot more sort of freedom to try those sort of like animations and experiment with easings and timing and things like that. And but yeah, I think like for sure, I think like there's definitely I think like one example off the top of my head that I'm thinking about, where it can maybe like be separated into like, you know, a kind of one-off situation. Like recently, like just before I left Clerk, we were working on this animation for a model that I believe it was like whenever you clicked a button, it's sort of like animated from the button, or
Mm.
like, you know, and I think like the button was in different places or whatever on the actual product. So wherever it was, so for example, if it was at the bottom of the screen, the model would like pop up into the middle, and it would always like animate into the center of the page.
Mm.
And I feel like that's like a good example of, you know, it uses basic principles of like the animation, but it's a kind of unique way of like just applying it to something that's quite a common UI pattern, like a modal, you know. And that sort of fits into that example of like, you know, we could have quite easily, you know, allowed a user to click the button and the modal just appeared. But I think like having that sort of like unique take on it, like just kind of helps elevate your product a little bit better. You know,
Oh yeah, I think
I wish
that
I
that
had
little
the
detail,
example.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Um, as long as it moves fast, like as long as it doesn't slow me
exactly.
down. I mean, if
Yeah,
those types of details are really cool, and
yep,
when it happens, you recognize it.
yep,
But I think they have to be subtle, and I'm not saying that
yeah,
the execution there wasn't subtle, because I think it's really really nice. But
yeah,
people have to be very careful and have a lot of intent on why they're doing that.
yeah,
Otherwise, they're doing it for no good reason. And again,
yeah,
the worst thing you can do with a transition or an animation within a product is slow anybody down. Like, it has to be for a
yeah,
reason. And I think the most popular and most important reason is where to draw somebody's eyes.
yeah.
It's just a visual indicator.
You make such a good point, because I believe it was like the last offsite we went on, and that was like the argument that everyone had like when we were building it, because, you know, some people had the opinion that it wasn't quick enough and fast enough to like appear, but others had like the opinion of like it was too slow, or, you know, it was too slow and we had to speed it up even further.
Mhm.
But it's interesting how you make that point where like it has to be like snappy, and it has to feel quick, or else, you know, you have that sort of fatigue of like, you know, something feeling too slowly animated, and it kind of like stops you in your path. You know, you kind of just want to like breeze through if it's like, you know, maybe it's an onboarding or something like that, or whatever. um I guess like, yeah, it's an interesting point how like it just has to feel quick, just because us humans just do, I don't know, we just assume that we need things done quick, you know. So
Mhm. Yeah.
um
There is a too quick, because there's a human element to this. I remember reading an article a long time ago and
yeah,
kind of gravitated to it about there's nothing in our lives as humans, as our eyes can process in, sub milliseconds. There's nothing that's instant to us. When you
hmm,
turn on a light bulb, there's a if you went
yeah,
in slow motion, there's a period of time of that filament lighting up,
yeah,
or the LED diode turning on. And we think it's instant, but it's not. When we see something like a 60 hertz or a 120 hertz or a 240 hertz monitor that's refreshing every second at that hertz rate, it can do it extremely fast, and it can make something appear instantly, and it can sometimes be jarring,
yeah,
because we're not, as humans, not used to seeing things
yeah,
instantly appear. So having even the most subtle transition on that entry state or that exit state makes it feel more natural.
yeah,
And the other side of that article, again, I don't remember where it was many years ago, is like using rounded corners, especially with the high DPI monitors that we have these days, where everything is super, super crisp. So when you have
yeah.
like a no border radius on something, that hard edge, like that's like one of the most precise, surgeon scalpel edges
Yeah,
that you can see, as opposed to most things. I mean, you can't machine anything at that tolerance. It's going to
yeah,
have some sort of subtle radius on it. So
yeah,
having like a zero point 0.5 or a 1 pixel border radius on something, even if you can't tell that it's doing that, it still just makes it feel better
yeah,
looking at it. And you
yeah,
can't really point out why, because you
yeah,
can't really see it. But if you put it up to next to something that's super hard edge,
yeah,
using that, then you can kind of like feel that difference between it. And we're just humans. We're processing things with
yeah,
our eyes and our ears, and those types of things we just kind of notice, but don't really understand why sometimes.
Yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit, because like you obviously mentioned there, like the feeling of it. Like I think like the feeling of animation, like you and me and other people have completely different opinions, and we like what we like, and just sometimes, you know, trying to define why you like that is quite a difficult thing. And I always remember when I spoke to Brid, and I think he asked me something like, why did you design it that way? And I was just like, oh, I just had a feeling that I liked how I designed it that way. And he
Mm-hmm.
found that quite interesting, how um, that's quite a thing in our kind of industry, in our line of work, where you have to have that sort of like that sort of taste of, maybe you've it's been built up through your experience of, like, your career, and I kind of want to touch on that through, we've obviously spoke about motion, and you have to have like an element of that kind of feeling of it feeling maybe too quick or too slow, or like you like the kind of bounce or the easing of a specific sort of animation. But yeah, so I wanted to get your feeling, or your opinion on how that translates into like product and web work. How do you define you know how do you define like what a good feeling is on the web, and what you see, and like how you then see a certain thing, you go, right, I want to maybe put that into my own work in the future, or I want to, it could be anything, like a button or a container or a website or whatever. I kind of want to get your kind of take on that, because I always remember like Rid kind of stumping me with it. It kind of is something that kind of goes in my head a lot, of like, um, like how do I like a certain thing, or how do I like how something's beautifully designed, and how do I determine how that's beautiful? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, like physical representations, I think is what does the most for me. I can recreate some sort of bouncing effect or moving effect just by like sliding. If you slide your phone on the table away from you, it the programmatic transitions that are given to us from CSS, like a standard ease out, a standard ease in, things like that. The ease in out is most
Yeah.
popular. They're not accurate.
Hmm.
They have this like programmatic feeling to them, to where they're like very robotic on start and very robotic on end, and it just doesn't really feel that natural. And I remember talking to Nev Flynn at Levin Labs about this, how like we just don't ever use the out of the box ease in, ease out,
Hmm.
type
Hmm.
transitions. And I always use motion, Framer motion. It used to be Framer motion, and now Matt has taken that away as motion.dev. I use it for all transitions, animations. I might use a linear CSS function for something if it's very small. I might use some sort of subtle transition if it's. I usually am using motion though,
Yeah.
.dev,
So you
and it's
don't.
very
So
easy to
for
tweak those things.
so for context, what you mean is you don't use the actual out of the box stuff that's usually comes. You usually, do you customize the entire kind of animation if
Yeah,
you're doing that?
yeah. So in the browser, there with CSS as a language, there are default transition values that you can
Right.
use,
Okay.
and it's
Got you.
those are pre-built for you, to where you give it a time
Right.
of that transition, and it'll handle all the movement for you. If it's an ease out, it starts instant and then flows to a stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not nice. It just doesn't feel. It's just like a very
Yeah.
robotic sort of ease out. And again, like as I'm sitting here like sliding my phone across the table, that physical representation, it has like this nice soft
Yeah.
stop, and it
Yeah.
just feels natural, feels better. So when you see that on the computer, you're like, like it feels very robotic. Ease
Yeah.
outs also, starting very slow in the middle and then out, but it's just hard to kind of dial that in. So I've written like some of my own functions to kind of handle that, to where I can figure out where I want the fastest point to be. Because even in an ease in out function, I most often 99% of the time do not want it to evenly ease into a center point of a top speed and then ease out. I usually, based on what I'm trying to communicate to the user, I want it to get to its highest point early on,
Hmm.
so that the ease out feels more natural. There are certain
Right.
cases where you might want something to dampen up against the end of it. It's harder to make that feel more natural to have something speed up and then slowly
Yeah, and slow
stop unless it
down.
was coming up against something.
Right.
But yeah, these like physical representations are a very good example of like how something should look and feel. And
Yeah.
I've seen Rano, and we've talked about Rano Freeberg. He's devouringdetails.com. He has the Devouring Details course. That's what we're talking about here. I've seen him post videos about him using physical representations for his animations as well, and kind of how it feels and what it looks like. And I think he's literally had like videos of him doing things with
Oh,
physical
yeah, I
objects to
remember seeing
show
that.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I relate to that so much because it's like I'm sitting here, I'm looking at an external hard drive that I have, and it has an exhaust fan on it to cool the hard drive. And I
Hmm.
know that fan, when it stops, is going to come down on a ball bearing system and stop, and it's going to stop and then kind of rotate back a little bit.
Right.
It's that type of stuff. There's physical representations to where if I was animating something spinning, I wouldn't just have it come down and then just stop. Like
Yeah.
it just
That's
feels
such
so
a good
awkward
point.
and dramatic. But if
Yeah.
I have it spin down and then just a slight little, spin, spin,
Yeah.
spin,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then just like
Yeah.
sit into place. And
Yeah.
another example is that when we drive cars, when we come to a stop, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
You kind of
physics
shoot
involved,
forward.
exactly forward and then back because of the
Yeah.
tires moving. There's the rubber on the tires. So when you come to a stop, it's not like your body moves. You
Yeah.
can't physically make that happen in the
Hmm.
sort of robotic way that a browser can.
Right.
So if we introduce that human feeling, that human aspect, and those human representations, physical
Yeah.
representations of that, we can come to something that feels so much more natural. So
Yeah.
again, I just use like kind of the natural intuition of representing motion and movement and transitions and stopping and starting in real life. If you take off sprinting right now, you can't start at your top speed. Like
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
if you sprint to your stop speed, there's going to be a period of ramp up to that. Hopefully it's ramping up very quickly, but you can't start at top speed and go. Like it's very jarring and jolting. If you ever
Yeah.
saw that when a rocket takes off, it doesn't get to top speed until it's way up in the sky. I mean, there's just
Yeah.
nothing that can instantly get to its top speed. So I try to, in some sort of way, transition to that.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like I would love to get in the brain of like Rauno, someone like Rauno, because obviously I wonder if he goes through his like every day of like just like looking at the world and maybe seeing like like seeing something in the wild, and like he just registers that and goes, right, I'm going to try and like implement that and like on the browser or like using animation or motion. Like
Yeah.
I just think that part of it's like fascinating, because obviously I'm someone who hasn't came from like I don't really know how to do any motion design or anything like that, but I always just find it fascinating how we can like mimic those sort of kind of real life human examples that you spoke about there. And yeah, I do, like when you mentioned that there, or like Brownell like showing videos, I think it was like, was it like the iPad or something? He had like something on an iPad, or like it was like the pen, the Apple Pencil or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll need to try and find it, because yeah, I feel like I've seen that before, and it's like fascinating to like see that come to life, that sort of thing come to life.
Mhm.
Um,
I'll reach out to Rana and see if it'd be fun to have him on here and talk through kind of what he's
yeah,
thinking, see if he's interested
yeah,
in that. But yeah, it's fun. It's really fun to explore like
yeah,
really good animations and really good transitions. I really nerd out about it too much sometimes, but there's certain
yeah,
illustrations that I'm working on, and certain interactions that just has to feel right. Otherwise, it's just not as good as it could be.
yeah. And I think I want to switch back. I know we've spoke about motion and animation and things like that, but I think like it might be worthwhile even just kind of briefly touching on like Stammy's tweet again. He mentions, he obviously mentions like someone come on the design team and was trying to pitch, having only like sort of 3 types of like animation to sort of simplify the process, and sort of kind of use basic easings. And this obviously touches on Rauno's point and his course as well, where he kind of mentions, he doesn't believe in a motion system as a concept. And, and Stammy kind of replied to that and mentions, he treats every new situation as like a unique having a unique feel to it. And I feel like that, to me, like that resonates so well because I feel like the same principles apply to like, the web and product work. I know for sure when I'm designing, maybe a website or, maybe like some product UI, like I do try to leave open the sort of like, I try and leave open like things like the shadows and like the typography scale and things like that. I try and keep it like wide open as long as possible, and try not to like kind of shoehorn everything into some sort of system, because I feel like it then like constrains you a lot to sticking with that. And then maybe like down the line, um if you want to change it, it's kind of a little bit more difficult to do that. So I just wanted to make that point. I feel like it does like kind of bode well for me whenever I'm designing like websites and things like that. That I want to make sure that if I really like a specific shadow for a specific container or button or whatever, you know, you, uh, you have to make you just have to kind of make sure that works, and keep it as keep it an open book for as long as possible.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
think like yeah, sorry, on you go.
yeah. I think we can even like talk about primitives, and I think about this in like various design system primitives of a tooltip is going to have different transitions and shadows, and since we're talking about that as well, as
Hmm.
a they're going to have different than a popover, and the popover is going to have different than a modal or a dialogue, and the dialogue is going to have different shadows and transitions than a toast. Like there's
Yeah,
just all these design system primitives that should have their own sort of styling and visual details
yeah,
based on what their responsibility is.
yeah,
Even I obsess even over like exit, like what's its intent of the exit
yeah,
of the element from the screen. um, if you have a toast that comes up from the bottom of the screen, that transition and that ease, however you design that, is going to be some sort of way that you want the user to feel based on, is it urgent, is it informational, is it something that they need to acknowledge. um, and I think the way that it presents itself on the screen through animation is kind of how the user is going to react to it.
yeah,
Then, based on, again, back to the exit, based on their interaction with it, it could have some sort of intent on its exit as well.
yeah,
Maybe a delete action or a cancel action slowly goes out of the way, just to kind
yeah.
of like this, like, okay, I'll
It's
get
like
out of here type
back
of
to the
thing.
whole feeling thing. It has to like
Yeah.
evoke some sort of emotion,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like a cancel or like a disappointment, like a, all right,
Yeah,
type thing. But if
yeah,
it's like an acceptance, maybe it's a little like bounce up and down, or
yeah,
just a quick like, cool, I'm out, like good to
yeah.
go. But again, all of these, they have to invoke a feeling, like you were saying, but you can't take time away from the user.
Of
They
course.
they have to, if they're going to have that much intent in them, they also have to have efficiency.
Yeah,
Otherwise, they're annoying. They're
yeah,
straight up
yeah. Of
annoying.
course.
You and there's that balance. And I think
Yeah,
that the easy bar is, if you're questioning it, if it's taking too long, if it's too much, then it is. Just assume
yeah,
that it is. We've
yeah,
talked about in past episodes, gradients and shadows and things like that. Like if you think it's too harsh, it probably is.
yeah, yeah,
So if you're saying that, should this be sped up, it probably should be sped up. But mouse interactions, standard mouse interactions, buttons, hover states, things like that, book should probably just default to no transitions, like,
yeah,
and just let it be instant, snappy, fast, and we'll figure that type of stuff out later. Because if you spend too much time on that, like, you're just focusing on the wrong things. But those sort of acknowledgement containers, like a dialogue or a popover or a toast, like those, I think that there's a lot that can benefit from how they present themselves, to then communicate the intent, urgency, value to the user, of
yeah.
what to do next.
One of the questions I've got here is, when should you prioritize bespoke motion, whether that's
Uh,
in a
yeah,
product or
like marketing websites, I think, are that very much the most bespoke. Like they're just different based on what their needs are, and how long, what story are they. I mean, they're usually responsible for a lot of storytelling rather than a lot of interaction.
yeah,
I think it comes down to, if there is a reason for some sort of different intent with that element, like it's going to have some sort of one-off
Yeah.
thing for it. It might be an announcement banner or some sort of custom toast interaction, like something that's an exciting experience that's happening, that's kind of one off. That's where it's going to be more bespoke.
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point as well, because I feel like the animation shot should almost like play into like the brand as well, like, and or the motion, sorry, I should say as well. Um, yeah, I think like defining that first and then like trying to like build around that, and I think like yeah, that totally resonates as well, because I feel like that's the whole point of like the brand as well. Like I feel like having too many like bouncy animations or whatever for like a, I don't know, like a funeral home or something like that. Funeral, I don't know if that's a bit grim, but like, it's like a juxtaposition of like feelings. So
So I've obviously invested time in being able to build these types of things, so be able to communicate it and think about my ideas and implement it. As a designer yourself, what types of tools do you use to like demo transitions, right? Or do you do that, or do you have communication strategies to engineers on how you think something should feel?
yeah,
I think that would be kind of hard. I think it's extremely hard to kind of communicate my ideas to someone else and expect them to align to
yeah,
it. So you kind of have to really rely on them to have really good taste as well.
of
But I'm sure
course.
there's situations you've come into where like you have a really exciting idea for how something could be animated or transition, and you have to communicate that in words rather than code. What's your
Yeah.
experience there?
So I feel like I'm probably in like the 1% of the designers here when I say like I've just been so lucky to have worked with like really amazing like engineers and like developers that can build out sort of animations and things like that. But obviously I want to play my part, and like I really want to make sure that that like I'm getting the idea across. Um, so I think like Brad is someone that I worked with obviously at Clerk U as well, and he's just got such a great he's got just such a great kind of design sense, whilst being obviously like a kind of front end engineer. And I feel like in the past, like how we used to work is like, if something kind of needed animated, like I would almost like design like the individual steps of like how that should animate from one frame to another. Not necessarily designing each frame individually, but like it sort of kind of paints a picture of like here's how it should start and here's how it should end. Um, and yeah, maybe one episode we can actually go through that. That's like probably a good point to like maybe bring up a Figma file where it shows some of that. I feel like the original kind of Clerk file had like really good examples of that. But yeah,
Mm.
I think like just keeping it. I think like just literally taking like the first frame and how that should appear on the page, and then like what should that look like at the end, and literally just like copy and pasting each artboard or whatever it is, like whether it's like a hero image or if it's like a maybe like a small illustration. I like to just make sure that each frame is sort of kind of like catered for, and the engineer then has some sort of like timeline to work with, and of course, communicating with the engineer, and trying to like help them as much as possible with like maybe it should slow down towards this part of the animation, or maybe it should speed up towards this part, like sort of kind of giving your input there, and then yeah, I think like just combining those sort of two methods has always kind of worked for me. Obviously I would love to be far more efficient animating and using the prototype tool in Figma, which is a minefield for me sometimes. But yeah, yeah, that's probably the techniques that and the sort of kind of method that I use.
I think there's a lot of value to designers learning more After Effects. I'm not proficient with After Effects. If I opened it up right now, I would no idea what to do. But I enjoy
Yeah.
doing, and there's a million videos out there, I'm sure, to teach me. But I've seen some really incredible output from folks that use After Effects, and I think non-technical designers to have another interface to design motion and animation with, to be able
Hmm.
to communicate their ideas would be like super valuable to them and their skill sets and to a team. when I'm telling designers to try these things and try to learn the motion or trying to communicate how something should transition in their designs, they shouldn't spend their time recreating the design in After Effects and some in an
Yeah.
application like that. They should just use black and white shapes, and
Yeah.
they should get the motion and the movement dialed in so that they can hand that over like as a video to the engineer.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of what I'm thinking for how this should move, and
Hmm.
hopefully that engineer can take that as a blueprint and as guidance to, does it feel the same? Does it look the same in the implementation? No. What about this is different? And I think that there might be some sort of like software bridge between a designer and a developer to be able to communicate that if the developer struggles to kind of have their own opinion on how it should feel. So I think there's probably more tooling out there. I know Framer has all of the like
Yeah.
motion animations built into it, things like that. So there's probably
Yeah.
other tools that you could use to just prototype that stuff. But
Hmm.
yeah, I myself also don't use the Figma prototyping tools. It's also a minefield for me. I tend to write it code, but I know that there's tools out there that would benefit designers to learn to be able to communicate their ideas on the transitions and motions and stuff, especially for really intense illustrations that are even harder to storytell and communicate.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Have you ever used After Effects? Have you ever tried it?
I haven't ever used After Effects, no, but I do see like quite a few people use it. It almost looks like a really advanced Flash.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of whenever I've like seen people use it. And like, yeah, Flash back in the day, like that used to be a minefield for me as well. Right, so now let's jump into Figma. Because I don't know if you've seen earlier, like I tweeted out the sort of kind of playback,
Mhm.
the playback which UI that I was designing for the new Shape website, which is
Yeah,
hopefully
excited about
coming
it.
soon. Yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to. I mean, it got quite a bit of traction on Twitter earlier, and I just, a lot of people were curious. Maybe about like the sort of kind of layers and things like that, and how I actually designed them. So I feel like that could be like a fun little thing to jump into. So yeah, obviously, from afar, it kind of looks pretty complex. I feel, there's lots of light, there's lots of stroke, like kind of strokes around the outside here. There's like, this kind of like weird shape here in the middle that kind of sits at the top. But honestly, like at the very heart of it, it's pretty simple. So if I zoom in further here, you'll see like here's a layer panel, and it kind of uses one sort of container here, and then you've obviously got like the play button, and then you've got like the orb here that kind of is almost like the kind of main focal kind of light point at the top of the sort of orb. The
Mhm.
rest is literally just on this like container. So if I jump in here and show you, um, I've obviously got three fills on it here. Um, there's one fill at the top here, which is like, yeah, it probably isn't even needed, but like I just felt like this light was just maybe a bit too harsh. So it's got like a 10% gradient on it. It goes, it's just a black simple gradient. Um, the second layer I've got here is a radial gradient, and again, super simple. I kind of drag this up to like 60% again, just to help that this like sort of main shape here to almost like refract the light across the back of like the orb.
Mhm.
Um, and then obviously, the bottom kind of fill layer is just like, white opacity that's down at 8%. And that just kind of helps fill in that sort of kind of like bubble, that bubble layer. And then the rest is like literally there's a stroke, and that's just like, there's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to it, here that it's just got like a few different points in the gradient with like, multiple different opacities on each. And again, that the stroke here is just to help like this kind of section here, just to like bring that out a little bit more. There's probably a few different ways you could do this. This is just the way I do it. you could probably get away with maybe building it with different different strokes. So you could probably have like one stroke that goes from white to white here, and then maybe this is like 0% and this is like full like opacity, and then like build the strokes that way. But yeah, I feel like doing it this way, you've kind of like got everything in the one manageable stroke layer.
It's
And
always wild
then
how we design in this way with all these layers and different strategies and overlays and all that. But then when building it, like I would
yeah,
probably
it's
just use
totally
box
different.
shadows. Like
Yeah,
yeah. If they could think about how to, like, there has like this progressive blur effect to this, and a designer might use a progressive blur to get that sharp edge at the top of
yeah,
the gradient. To like, I wouldn't use that in development.
yeah.
Like that'd be really expensive processing for just that type of
Of
detail.
course.
I'd probably have a radial like background that is on the whole thing, and then you actually use box
Yep.
shadows to cover it up, to cover up
Ah,
the highlight, so that like
okay.
the dark and the sides is all just another box shadow that's inset that
Mm-hmm.
covers it up. And if you use a negative spread on that, it'll pull it in, and then I can shift it up to where it has that like sharp, like orby sort of
Yeah.
shape to it. So yeah, we design in Figma in this way, but the
Yeah, it's
implementation of
totally
it ends up being
different
completely
building
different,
it. Yeah,
as long as it
yeah,
looks the same, of course.
yeah, of course. And yeah, I mean, like I've just noticed here, I've got like some like half pixels, and that's just because like I resized it earlier. Like I'm not a crazy person and don't use like 7.14 for like the X and Y
Yeah.
axis. But yeah, so I mean, I think it kind of covers it. The only two things left is like these inner shadows. I don't know what you're doing these days, but like I've found myself like using like the half pixel like for the blur for some reason these days. I don't know why, but I think like
Yeah.
on like smaller kind of like finer details, it just kind of like adds that extra. I don't know. Maybe I'm going crazy, but
No, it's amazing how we've evolved from like no odd numbers and like the
yeah,
OCD just
exactly.
taking over to now we're using pixels. I found myself doing it too, especially for like little tiny highlights on things, little tiny
Yeah,
details, to use a half pixel stroke just to get like a super crisp edge.
yeah.
I found myself doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's like, there's literally two effects on it, like two inner shadows that basically sit at the bottom and the
Hmm.
top, and both have like sort of different ways of how they're treated on the actual shape itself. Um, and yeah, we're just working on like a really, really kind of simple hover style for this as well, like hover effect. Um, you added like an extra drop shadow onto this where it just like mimics the same color that we're using like throughout the kind of
Hmm.
shape website. So yeah, I just wanted to bring in that like accent color. So yeah, still working on the hover stakes. I feel like this could probably be like a radial gradient to like center in between this like orb here thing,
Hmm.
so that it kind of like it doesn't quite take over like the full shape maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of like
Let's add a gradient overlay on the triangle in the middle and add that highlight color, that accent color to that in some sort of way. I think I would just add like another gradient overlay on there
yeah,
that is like that tealish color to no tealish color, and then just drag those sliders around. So I
yeah.
think that like that's how that sort of center icon would react. Yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
something like that. It would sort of react to the light around it and the color around it in some sort of way.
Yeah, you could probably even add like a
And it might
um,
even be like the reverse of it, to where the color would most likely be on the bottom side of it, because of light hitting the top side would illuminate the top of the triangle.
mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So like then as the light falls off of it, it would allow the reflection of the surrounding environmental light. Yeah, something like that is
Yeah,
I think what I'd probably do.
yeah. I wanted to even like try and add like some sort of like darker shade of like this in here as well,
Mhm.
because I feel like this wouldn't really be like the full black that it currently is. So you could probably like get away with like adding some sort of like glow towards the top.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that too.
maybe a bit darker, but yeah, that's that's how they're designed. You know, there's not like a lot to them. It's just a lot of like trial and error with shadows and inner shadows and borders and strokes, and you know, a lot of playing around with just a lot of those things and effects. So I hope that was interesting for everyone.
Next week, we let's go through a lot of the kind of Q&A that we've gotten. Back when we first talked about doing this podcast, and we can kind of put a feeler out there on what people thought, that was one of the things that we asked, like, what would you want to hear? And we got a lot of responses from that, and questions from various folks on Twitter. And I've started to collect that list, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to kind of go through there and kind of address people's questions, who asked them, and whatnot. I think it'd be a lot of fun to do that next week. So
definitely, I think. I mean, I just want to say as well, thanks to everyone who's tuned in to the first 2 episodes. You know, I know I've had like a couple of people message and just say they've enjoyed it. So I appreciate everyone tuning in. And I think next week that's such a great. I think that'll be a great way to, like, you know, talk about certain topics that people are interested in and kind of get answers for those. So I'm excited about that.
Cool. Catch you then.
Nice one. See ya.